Hello and welcome in a new episode preparing you for the PMP exam. I'm your instructor Nader Omran. In this episode we will talk about the process of collecting requirements. At the end of this episode we will be able to list inputs which helps by collecting requirements for your projects. List and explain the tools and skills needed by collecting requirements. And create a requirements traceability matrix. Collect requirements is the process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. It defines and establishes the basic structure for managing the scope of both project and product. Stakeholders always have a direct influence on the project completion. We have to discover and document the needs and determine the decomposition level of the project requirements. Requirements include the specifications, conditions, and functions of the project deliverables that are stated in a formally agreements. It includes also quantified needs of sponsor, customer, and other stakeholders. The project requirement becomes part of the scope baseline, which will be always monitored during the execution of the project, comparing the result of work done to the baselines. Requirements are essential element for conducting the work breakdown structure, WBS. Cost, schedule, quality planning, and sometimes procurement. Without efficient requirement information, you will struggle by these tasks.
Okay, how we start working on this process?
Conducting this process begins with an analysis of information included in the project charter, the stakeholder register, and the stakeholder management plan. Organizations may divide requirements based on categories that make it easy to add refinement and updates later throughout the project execution. Examples of those specifications include business requirements. This is the higher level needs of the organization as a whole, such as business issues or business advances, and the reason why we do this project. Stakeholder requirements. This will describe the needs of stakeholders, individuals, or groups. Solution requirements. The future, function, and characteristics of the deliverables that will meet the business and stakeholder requirements. The deliverables requirements are further grouped into functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements describe the capability and behaviors of the product to functions as desired. Non-functional requirements describe the environmental conditions or quality required for the deliverables, such as reliability, security, performance, safety and supportability, etc. Transition requirements describe temporary capabilities and the requirements needed to move from the current status as is to the future status to be. Project requirements. This defines the actions, processes, or other conditions that the project should meet. Quality requirements. This is the conditions or criteria needed to validate the successful completion of the project deliverables. That was the classification examples of the requirement. Let's move forward to the inputs of this process. Collect requirements. Input. The first input is the scope management plan. The scope management plan defines how project teams will determine which types of requirement need to be collected. We need also the Requirements Management Plan. The Requirements Management Plan is a guideline. It defines the processes to be used throughout the collect requirements process. The Stakeholder Management Plan. The Stakeholder Management Plan is used to verify the communication requirements and the level of stakeholder involvement in the project and in the requirements activity. The fourth input is the Project Charter. The Project Charter provides the high-level description of the deliverables, which allow us to develop detailed requirements. The last input to this process is the Stakeholder Register, to identify who can provide information to the requirements. Also, the Stakeholder Register contains the stakeholder expectations. Those are the 5 inputs to the collect requirements process. Let's move to the big effort of this process, which is the tools and technique. In this process, we have many of the tools and techniques which we can perform. We will learn about 11 of them. And those are interviews, focus groups, facilitated workshops, group creativity techniques, group decision-making techniques, questionnaires and surveys, observations, prototypes, benchmarking, context diagrams, document analysis. The first one is interviews. An interview may be formal or informal. You collect information from stakeholders by talking to them directly, asking prepared and spontaneous questions and recording the responses.
Who should I interview?
Experienced project participants, sponsors and other executives, and subject matter experts. This will improve the effort of identifying and defining the features and functions of the deliverables. Interviews are performed with individuals or groups. You may also perform interviews for obtaining confidential information. The second technique is focus groups. Those are groups that contain subject matter experts and qualified stakeholders to gain their expectations, perceptions, opinions, beliefs and attitudes towards a product, service or result. In one word, project deliverables. Questions are asked in an interactive group settings, where participants are free to talk with other group members. This task may be performed by a trained moderator, who guide the group through an interactive discussion. The third output is facilitated workshops. Collecting requirement is also conducted through facilitated workshops that bring key stakeholders together in an interactive discussion to gain trust, faster relationships, and communication improvement between the workshop's participants. Facilitated workshops are most used technique by defining cross-functional requirements and balancing stakeholder differences and expectations. And here are some examples of widely used facilitated workshops in different industries. Joint Application Design, JAD. In the software development industry, it brings key stakeholders, subject matter experts, and the design team together to resolve their differences in neutral and non-hostile atmosphere. Quality Function Deployment, QFD, in the manufacturing industry. It helps determine critical characteristics for new product development. Voice of Customer, VOC. Here customer needs will be collected, sorted and prioritized to be considered for future goals. Also, you will hear about user stories. Those are short descriptions of needed functionality, describes stakeholders' role, goal, and motivations. User stories are widely used within Agile methods. The fourth technique to use by conducting the process of collecting requirements is group creativity technique. Those also are used to identify project and product requirements. Those techniques promote creative actions. They focus on a variety of creativity. They include techniques for generating ideas and different thinking. Include also methods for reframing problems and changes. Therefore, it can be used as a part of problem-solving sessions. These methods include word games, written exercises, and different types of improvisations. And here are some examples of these groups. Brainstorming. It is all about generating and collecting multiple ideas related to the project and product requirements. It does not include voting or prioritization, and therefore is often used with other techniques. Nominal group technique. Same as brainstorming, but it includes voting process used for ranking or prioritizing the most useful ideas. Mind mapping. Here we are collecting the result of individual brainstorming sessions and putting it in one map to discover differences and commonality and generating new ideas. Affinity diagrams. Here we are classifying a large numbers of ideas into groups for review and analysis. Multi-criteria decision analysis. A technique that considers multiple criteria in decision making. By evaluating multiple conflicting criteria that influence in making the decisions. For example, by purchasing a car, criteria such as cost, comfort, safety, and fuel economy are the main criteria to be considered. That means it is unusual to buy the cheapest car to have the most comfortability and safety. The next technique is group decision-making techniques. Group decision-making techniques is a technique to assess multiple alternatives that will be used to generate, classify, and prioritize product requirements. Group decision-making, also known as collaborative decision-making. This is a technique of collecting alternatives and making a choice through evaluating these alternatives. We have four types of decision-making, and those are unanimity. This means that everyone agreed to the specific action or idea, using the Delphi technique in which the experts answer questionnaires providing feedback regarding the responses from each round of requirement gathering. Here the responses are anonymous and only available to the facilitator. Majority. A decision that supported or agreed from more than 50% of the participants of the group. Uneven number of participants will grant reaching a decision. Plurality. A decision reached through the largest block in a group decides. This method is used when the number of options or alternatives is more than 2. Dictatorship. Here is one individual makes the decision for the whole group. These are the most known group decision-making techniques that can be applied to the group creativity techniques while collecting requirements. The next tool is Questionnaires and Surveys. Those are written sets of questions designed to quickly collect information from a large number of respondents.
When should I use questionnaires and surveys technique?
for example by varied audiences, or when a quick turnaround is needed, or when respondents are geographically distributed, or also where statistical analysis is needed. The tool number 7 is observations. Observation is also known as job shadowing. It's all about watching or observing individuals by doing the work. This is useful when having difficulty by defining their requirements. It is usually done by an external observer or a participant observer who is experienced in the project or the product field to uncover hidden requirements. Prototypes. Defined as prototyping is a method of obtaining early feedback on a requirement by providing a working model of the expected product before actually building it. Prototypes are touchable things. It allows stakeholders to experiment with the model of the final product, instead of discussing abstract representations of requirements. Prototypes support the concept of progressive elaboration in iterative cycles as shown. Mockup creation, user experimentation, feedback generation, and prototype revision. When enough feedback cycles have been performed, the requirements obtained from the prototype are sufficiently complete to move to the design or build phase. Storyboarding is a prototyping technique showing sequence or navigation path through a series of images or illustrations. Storyboards are used in some industries such as film, advertising, and on Agile and other software development projects. For instance, storyboards use mockups to show navigation paths through web pages, screens, etc. Tool number 9 is benchmarking. This is a comparing approach of the current or planned processes and operations to other comparable internal or external organizations. The key benefit of benchmarking is to identify best practices, generate ideas for improvement, and provide a basis for measuring performance. Next tool, context diagrams. Defined as a visual depiction of the product scope showing a business system such as process, equipment, computer system, etc., and how people and other systems interact with it. It is an example of a scope model that shows the inputs and outputs to the business system. Also documents the actors providing the input and the actors receiving the output. The last technique to conduct the collect requirements process is document analysis. Document analysis is a type of collecting requirements. It's done by analyzing existing documents and identifying requirements relevant information.
And which documents should be analyzed?
Well, documents that may be analyzed during collecting requirement process includes but are not limited to business plans, marketing literature, agreements, requests for proposal, current process flows, logical data models, business rules repositories, application software documentation, business process or interface documentation, use cases, problem issue logs, policies and procedures, and regularity documentation. Now let us see what we should get after deploying all these tools and techniques. Here we arrived to the collect requirements outputs. We have two outputs. The first one is requirement documentation. It is a progressively elaborated document that describes how each requirement satisfies the project and business need. Requirements need to be unambiguous in mean of measurable, traceable, complete, consistent, and acceptable to key stakeholders. The requirement document may take the form of a simple Excel sheet, listing all requirements categorized by stakeholder and priority, or in a detailed form containing an executive summary, detailed descriptions. The detailed requirements documentation include components such as executive summary. This is a summary for executive management. Business requirements. Here is a description of business and project objectives for traceability, business rules for the performing organization, and guiding principles of the organization. Stakeholder requirements, including impact to other organizational areas, impacts to other entities inside or outside the performing organization, and stakeholder communication and reporting requirements. Solution requirements, including functional and non-functional requirements, technology and standard compliance requirements, support and training requirements, quality requirements, and reporting requirements. Solution requirements that can be documented textually in models or both. Project requirements, such as levels of service, performance, safety, compliance, and acceptance criteria. Transition requirements. Requirements assumptions. For example, dependencies and constraints. You may find these templates in the organization's assets. And if not, you should deploy such templates based on your organization need. The second output from collect requirements process is the requirement traceability matrix. Defined as the requirement traceability matrix is a grid that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Requirement traceability matrix is a document, usually in form of a table or Excel sheet. The implementation of requirements traceability matrix ensures that each requirement adds business value by focusing it to the business and project objectives. It builds a kind of a structure for managing changes to the product scope.
But what information we are tracing?
Here you are tracing and watching the changes to each requirement for the business need, opportunities, goals, and objectives, project objectives, project scope and WBS deliverables, product design, product development, test strategy and test scenarios, high-level requirements to more detailed requirements, and attributes associated with the requirements can be added to the requirements traceability matrix. These attributes help to define key information about the requirements. It's same as a log file for the requirements. It includes attributes such as unique identifier, a short description of the requirements, the owner, source, priority, version, current status and date. You may add attributes that meet stakeholder satisfaction, including stability, complexity, and acceptance criteria. Here we are at the last slide where we visualize the overview of all processes. Here again the input to collect requirements process. The scope management plan and the requirements management plan from the scope management plan process. And the stakeholders management plan and stakeholders register from both processes in the stakeholders management knowledge area. and the project charter from the process of developing the project charter. After performing the 11 tools and techniques, we came out with the requirements documentation and requirements traceability metrics. The requirements documentation will be needed in all the following scope management area processes, and also in the quality planning process as well as procurement planning process. The requirements traceability metrics will be needed in validating and controlling scope processes. Again, we arrived to the end of this episode. Now we are able to list inputs, which helps by collecting requirements for your projects. List and explain the tools and skills needed by collecting requirements. And create a requirements traceability matrix. I hope it was informative for you, and thank you for watching.